at the price that he probably should cost, it's sort of hard to justify trading for him, and it's also very hard to justify trading him away in any situation. And Mahomes, we're going to use as sort of the proxy for this super valuable quarterback. Obviously, you can have Josh Allen in the same tier. He's tending to go 101. The way I would view that is, you can certainly have Allen in the same tier as Mahomes, and they probably should be. And maybe you can even make a case that like a Lamar Jackson or a couple other guys belong in that tier. I don't think you can make a very strong case that anyone is more valuable than Mahomes or like a tier higher than Mahomes. So it's sort of this discussion of the most valuable player in Dynasty. But the reason we're going to talk about it is I made a huge trade to acquire Mahomes in a Superflex best ball Dynasty league with our buddy Davis Maddock, friend of the pod. Late last week, you're in the league. I have not gotten your thoughts on it yet. And so really what this is going to be, let's see how nicely Shawn can dunk on me for trading away a ton of future value to try to kind of go for it right now. I'm excited to find that out. We've completely waited. We have not had any discussions off the air about this. Not gotten any feedback from you other than kind of, I think he said it was, crazy. It was a big deal. So I have a lot of this running back firepower, and I was looking at this roster trying to figure out what I want to do. I definitely want to keep this perpetual reloading, long-term window open like we've talked about so much on the show. I took in this auction Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, and Cortland Sutton as sort of my – and I have Terry McLaurin. So I took a handful of sort of at that time veteran receivers already that are now aging a little bit. I dealt both Kupp and Robinson in season that first year because I got off to sort of a slow start, had some injuries. Kupp goes on to have the monster – it's a best ball with a trade window, so I dealt them in season, but he goes on to obviously have the monster 2021. But that was the deal that helped me get a lot of picks, and I'm still not like necessarily mad about that trade because along with Javonte and Etienne, I picked up Justin Fields. I was a little bit more quarterback and receiver heavy last year. I did take De'Ami Brown, which hasn't really panned out. But I have, at this stage, Diggs, McLaurin, Cortland Sutton as sort of my core wide receivers. The other guy I took last year was Elijah Moore. And then in this year's draft, I had sort of a higher pick, and I was able to get Jameson Williams. But I'm looking at this roster. I have Matthew Stafford, Justin Fields, and Jimmy Garoppolo as my quarterbacks. I was able to add Sam Howell in the rookie draft, but not something that's going to make, that I can count on to make a big impact. Good running backs, still pretty strong receivers. I have a lot of sort of average receiver types. Christian Kirk, Allen Lazard, Gabriel Davis obviously has some upside there. So a pretty deep receiver group with the Diggs, McLaurin, Sutton, and then Elijah Moore, Jameson Williams as some young guys, and then those other sort of veterans. Didn't really have great tight end depth either. It's tight end premium. It's best ball. So felt I was strong at running back, felt I was strong at receiver. Definitely felt to actually compete with this team, I was a quarterback away. If I could get a really legit quarterback and have Stafford as my second and Fields as my third and this Garoppolo, Howell, combination as sort of my fourth quarterback, who knows how much they'll even play this year, that could compete for sure, especially if that quarterback was very good. The running backs were going to be good enough. The receivers could probably still be good enough. So I traded for Patrick Mahomes, and I dealt both Elijah Moore and Jameson Williams to do it, which was very tough. I like both of those guys. We've talked about maybe being willing to move off Moore. The way I view Moore, certainly them drafting Garrett Wilson isn't great for Moore. And Davis's team is sort of rebuilding. The way I view it is it's a good fit for Davis's team because we think Moore is very good. If Zach Wilson isn't good, this Jets team has enough talent that they're going to have to figure out quarterback at some point. So it's a thing where, to me, Elijah Moore, much like Jameson Williams, has some short-term question marks, right? But I think in 2024, we can feel pretty good about both of these players. Jameson is very straightforward. He's coming back from an ACL to probably 2023, maybe even late 2022. I mean, this guy might actually help rosters this year, but I had to give up something to get Patrick Mahomes. Did not want to give up Jameson Williams at all. He's a huge blue chip player. Has a third round dynasty startup ADP, I believe. or at least we have him ranked in that range. Elijah Moore, similar dynasty startup ADP. They're kind of back to back. Moore, I view similarly. I just kind of want to mention this where I have some concerns for 2022, but I still feel really good about him in 2023, 2024. I don't think Garrett Wilson's going to be a long-term. I mean, long-term, if they get a quarterback in, this offense looks a lot like the Bengals, where they have Jason Higgins and you have a Joe Mixon type. I mean, that's how I would view Wilson, Elijah Moore, and Breece Hall long-term. But you need a Burrow quarterback, right, to make that look good. Right now, everyone's looking at the Jets and saying they can't support two receivers, essentially, I think is sort of the feel. And so it's, well, how bad is Garrett Wilson for Elijah Moore? Well, maybe that's bad for 2022. I don't really view it as that bad for 2023, 2024. I mean, I don't want to be the guy who's sitting here hyping up the player that I traded away, but I do think it wasn't easy to trade him away. I think a lot of people are calling him a sell right now. I don't think he's like a very clear sell, especially if you're sort of rebuilding. We feel like there's talent there, and he is a guy to have for the future, even if 2022 might not be amazing. So I traded both of those players and my 2023 rounds 1, 2, and 3. And this was sort of my opening offer. I knew I had to be very competitive. It was going to have to include a 2023 one. Davis made that clear. He wanted to add an extra first next year. I did. Part of the reason this worked was Davis is a Chiefs fan as well and had stockpiled multiple players on the Chiefs to stack with Mahomes. So he had Nicole Hardman and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Neither of them is moving the needle a ton. But it was notable to me that trading away both of those current year receivers in Jameson Williams and Elijah Moore, that I would be able to get back two guys that could give me production, especially in a best ball. I feel like Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Nicole Hardman will give me some wide receiver production and not completely deplete my receiver core. So it's sort of a deep, not star-studded wide receiver core now, although it does have Diggs. And I was able to get Noah Fant as well. And I mentioned briefly, I needed some tight end help. So the final trade was Elijah Moore, Jameson Williams, my 2023 first, second, and third. So just a ton of future value. Two guys with third-round starter ADPs, like I said, 3 future picks in a great 2023 class for Mahomes, MVS, Nicole, and Noah Fant. It was not an easy trade to make, Shawn. But Patrick Mahomes is worth a lot, and he immediately makes this roster, I think, a competitor. I'm not sure how good it makes it, but now I have Mahomes, Stafford, Fields, like I was saying. I think my quarterbacks are now above average. If these running backs hit, if Etienne and Javonte and Gainwell and Elijah Mitchell, if that pans out, that group, and if I'm able to get enough receiver points, which now my receiving core is not as good as I want it to be, but it's not bad. I mean, I've said a lot of names here, but, Diggs, Gabe Davis, it's got Nicole and MVS. It's got Christian Kirk, Alan Lazard, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, and a few other sort of flyers. Pretty deep. Guys that are going to run routes and play. Tight ends aren't amazing, but Noah Fant was able to add Trey McBride in the rookie draft and have Hayden Hurst as sort of my number 3. This is a pretty good roster now. The question is, did I give up too much? And as I've sat around and thought about it over the weekend, I'm not really sure how I feel about it. But I want your complete unbiased, hard take. We know Davis can take it as well. He can take it as well as he can dish it. If you don't like his side of it for whatever reason, you got to be the arbiter. I want your take, and I want it to be blunt because I'm trying to learn still on these deals. What did you think of this trade?
This one is so interesting, right? And it is that tension between acquiring one of the very best players, and then on the other side of that, giving up a little bit of flexibility. We talk about always wanting to be on the side of having as many potential paths to victory as possible. You're getting the best player, you're giving up a lot, and you're giving up pieces that are very interesting and that they would be retradable in other ways if you hadn't used them like this. It's kind of interesting within the context of, I think we talked a little bit on the show last week about the move that Monty Fawn and I made to move Joe Burrow for Jonathan Taylor. There were some other pieces involved, but you're moving from a quarterback to a running back. Do you want to make that move knowing what the likely longevity is for the two players at the different positions. So that, I think, is interesting. One of the things I did here first to give me a little bit of a context, and not necessarily that this would be the entire way to evaluate the trade clearly, but just to give a little bit of a starting point, was go to my Dynasty Superflex rankings, where have them set up in tiers, and those tiers represent trade value, and to get a sense of just what that would calculate out to. Right now, one of the things here is that you could certainly argue with the basic setup, especially for the very top players. We have this top tier that is worth 3 first-round picks. And if you wanted to say that Allen and Mahomes were kind of on a separate tier even from that, where you would need to pay more than that, and maybe they separate from the rest of the group. So the other players that I have in that tier would be the other 4 quarterbacks, would be Taylor, would be those top 2 receivers in Chase and Jefferson, and then would be Kyle Pitts in a tight end premium format. I don't think that you're going to be trading Mahomes for Kyle Pitts straight up. And so clearly there's going to be some nuance even within that tier. But if we use that general framework and look at the rest of these guys here, we come out with a final result that is 3 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a third-round pick for you, 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, and a third-round pick for Davis. So from that perspective, you say maybe he got an extra second-round pick in the deal. Maybe you shouldn't have or didn't need to include the 2023 round 2, especially as that could be a very meaningful pick, especially in Superflex. However, again, Mahomes, you could just add, if you wanted, an extra second-round pick onto him as being either the first or the second. I think the way that you put it too, we could be looking at this discussion a year from now and having Mahomes as the clear first pick in all startups, and you would kind of have him separated from a lot of the rest of those guys in the first round. The other thing here is that I'm actually not giving any value to Gino Smith, who went to Davis, but that's an interesting throw-in piece for the reasons we talked about. I'm not giving any value to Nicole Hardman. He's in a tier where basically we're saying he's worth the roster spot, but not necessarily worth trade compensation on top of that. And yet within this context where it's best ball, I think Hardman actually is worth some trade compensation, right? I mean, he's going to be somebody that if you're playing in a normal league, you could never really start him on a team that was good. In your case, he becomes more interesting on a team that hopes to compete, especially within the context of having Mahomes and MVS. Those two guys, I think, spread out your likely scoring a little bit and help you perhaps on different weeks. Now, it's not to say they couldn't hit on the same week, but you want to have a little bit. Sometimes people look at best ball and almost think of it as like this 1 week DFS tournament. That's not really what it is, especially if you have a multi-week championship, for example. So I think the fact that you got both Valdez-Scantling and Hardman is pretty interesting here. The other thing is then you look at the actual teams. And we talk about crafting these trades as a win-win. This is a situation where, for the reasons you mentioned, it makes a ton of sense for Davis. From your perspective, your team can be competitive this year. That makes sense. And then Fant is a player where I think that his value is going to rise. And so that would be another element that not only does it potentially balance out the general trade calculation, but also he's a very good fit for your roster because tight end was the weakness. So if Seattle addresses that position, the quarterback position that is, in some additional way this year, which still seems like a possibility, then I think his value would jump right away. It's also a situation where he's young enough and good enough that his value is going to be there for a while. The next time, or really the first time in his career that he actually gets above average quarterback play, I think that Noah Fant is a big piece. And so I like the fact that you got him back in this particular trade. So for a lot of reasons there, I think that this trade is perfect, but even to then extend it a little bit further would be the point about Mahomes himself. And one of the things that is happening a little bit right now, and you tend to see it, I think, the most in best ball, where you will be in leagues where he falls. And Connor O'Driscoll and I took him in our underdog league. It's still a little bit questionable to spend the pick we did on him, but he was enough below ADP that we thought it was an interesting opportunity to add a little bit of uniqueness to that build and take advantage of upside that I think is there, right? If you're seeing him fall below the third or fourth quarterback, which happens from time to time, number one, I think you want to get some exposure, but number two, it gives you a sense of how this is probably a buying window across formats. So something that you take in one format and can apply to another, we discussed that a little bit for sort of best ball to dynasty in one of the early shows this season. But I think that gives a little bit of a sense of where maybe you're able to get Mahomes right now, because there are questions. This goes back to our Tyreek Hill trade show, where I said, I think the Chiefs are going to come out of this better, right? They're going to come out of it with more flexibility. They're going to come out of it with a higher floor. And you listen to Mahomes' comments on the trade, and he goes through the whole process that obviously you have to go through, where you say, Tyreek Hill's a great friend. I didn't want to see him leave. He's a superstar. We're going to lose some of the things that he brings to the table. But some of the things that teams did to us last year, where we're playing these deep shell coverages, that may have to change. We're still going to be able to get deep with Valdez-Scantling, but we're going to have some guys who can get open in those intermediate areas. So I thought it was interesting that he's basically saying the things that I've been hoping myself for how this Chiefs offense might evolve. He's like, they may have to come up and cover us more in man-to-man. And this is before they add Sky Moore to the equation. So you say, well, Sky Moore hurts these two receivers that you added, but the Chiefs now have created that flexibility we always talk about in a reality format, to where, if Moore is a little bit of a bust right away, that in and of itself won't kill them. If Juju is this most recent version of himself, as opposed to those two amazing years when he first came to the NFL, that'll be disappointing, but in and of itself won't kill them. They've got even some peripheral guys. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Justin Ross, but they also have Corey Coleman. I mean, the likelihood that any of those guys at the very end matter is probably small, but the Chiefs offense is going to be better than it was last season in 2022. It could be a lot better in 2023. Patrick Mahomes' value is going to go up. He's going to be on your team when that happens. And then you mentioned a bunch of the players on your team. If you're going to make a move like this, to not have your team be essentially in a 1 or 2 year window and then done, you still need to have a lot of guys with trade value in the future. Your quarterbacks are going to have future trade value. Your running backs very possibly could. They're young enough that if things go right, you'll be able to play them for a couple of years and then trade them. Your wide receivers are going to have some future trade value. You have a lot of ways to get back out of this. And I think that's a crucial part of it as well.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of what I was thinking. And obviously on the show, we've talked a lot about basically trying to acquire future value and trying to acquire young players. And so this trade deviated from that substantially, obviously. I mean, I'm trading away not just Elijah Moore, who I think you can get away with just trading away him, but Jameson Williams, you can probably get away with just trading away him right after you draft him in a rookie draft if it's for the right type of deal. But he's certainly an acquisition target, absolutely. And I'm trading away these 3 future picks, which the big thing as I thought about it over the weekend was maybe I didn't need to open with the round 2 and round 3 from 2023. Maybe Elijah Moore, Jameson Williams, and that 2023 round 1 pick could have been the bulk of the deal. At the same time, to get Mahomes was always going to take a little bit of a premium overpay, I think. So who knows? Maybe Davis wouldn't have accepted that deal, and maybe it wouldn't even have been able to move the needle. I don't know. You had to. I felt like I had to come with something, right? You mentioned Gino Smith. I failed to mention him, but I had drafted him in the rookie draft. It includes veterans as well. I took him in the 5th round. There is this in-season trade window, so I had mentioned to Davis as well. I think it certainly makes sense for Davis's roster, as he's not planning to be competitive this year, that if Gino is the starter, as you sort of implied that, you're thinking he will be, Davis could have this in-season trade window potentially to flip Gino for like a 3rd round pick in the future, which would be a pretty nice addition to this deal for him. I didn't want to carry 6 quarterbacks, so I kind of had to decide whether it would be Gino or Garoppolo that I would kind of include in this deal. I think you said a lot of what I thought. When I went into the deal, I had that conversation with Pat Corain that I alluded to at the top, and it was this thought of, can I justify trading for him, frankly? And I started looking And I thought, yeah, I can part with Elijah Moore to make this work with this receiving core. Didn't want to part with Jameson Williams, but I knew he would be somebody Davis would be interested in. Davis, I've played in multiple leagues with him. He's rebuilding. He seems to have a keen eye for players that are devalued because of injury and might then gain value. Last year, after Travis Etienne got hurt, he offered me Clyde Edwards-Helaire for Etienne straight up, and we had a discussion about that. My thought was CEH could lose quite a bit of value, and I frankly didn't think my roster was close enough that even if CEH sort of hit a ceiling. But that is a guy that, in redraft going into last year, a lot of people still thought had ceiling. We talked positively about his potential for 2021. So I didn't make that deal, but it was a situation where Davis was willing to kind of take the whole red shirt on ETN, knowing that he would have more value into the future, or potentially could have quite a bit more than CEH. Probably was a more than fair offer to offer me CEH for ETN. So along sort of those same lines, kind of knowing your league mates, I was thinking, okay, Jameson Williams is going to have this interest to him because Jameson Williams, we've talked about, might be the top receiver in this class if he didn't have the ACL tear. He'd be right up in that top tier. And if Davis is not playing to contend this year, that's something he can wait on for 2023. So I started with those two, and then obviously, trying to figure out the rest of the picks. And it's interesting you mentioned the RotoViz tool. I definitely use the RotoViz tool, and I definitely looked at your ranks and was adding it all up and figuring things out. It's an awesome tool. We've talked about it on the show before. If you have a RotoViz sub, go to their Dynasty ranks. You can click over to the tiers tab, or you can just look at the normal ranks. But I really like the Dynasty tiers and how you have it positioned price-wise for the future draft pick value of each tier. So the first tier is 3 round ones, the second tier is 2 round ones, and it goes down, so on and so forth. You get down to like the fifth tier, I think is two twos. It's really helped me sort of get a good idea of where the different values are. And then, you can always make your adjustments where you think guys are in tiers. My argument to myself, especially with Mahomes, was this is a player that himself is going to maintain so much value. And you just made a great case that he could even gain value, where if I did need to get out of this in any kind of way, I will be able to move Mahomes in the next couple of years, was sort of the decision that I made. I don't see any scenario where he loses significant value. I think he's going to be a very high level quarterback for a long time. I think he's probably the best quarterback of all time. People are groaning right now, when you talk about Tom Brady and some of the other greats, but Patrick Mahomes is a pretty fantastic player, regardless of whether you believe he's that good. I think he's going to continue to have some fantastic seasons. He does add a little bit of a rushing element. He doesn't necessarily need that. He's going to be a top 5 quarterback in a Superflex setup for as long as he's playing football. And I'm not that concerned about Tyreek Hill. And like you said, maybe that is creating a buying window, because now you're making this case that their offense could be even better. But the perception out there is we haven't seen him without Tyreek Hill. I'm with you. I think we're going to be surprised to find out just how good Patrick Mahomes is going to be without Tyreek Hill. I don't think it's going to be much of a concern at all. And in fact, I think, like you've described, people are forgetting how defenses started to take away what Tyreek Hill brought best, that vertical stretch ability, and that those long touchdowns were so key to Mahomes' best seasons, and they weren't really there these last couple of years. So that already was kind of out of the offense. And that made things more trickier. They were using Hill a lot more underneath and intermediate, and he's still great, fantastic in those areas. But the difference between him and some of the other players they now have in those areas is a lot closer than the difference between him and any other player in the league in terms of the deep targets, which they defensively teams were scheming out of their offense. And so you think back to 2021 and you think forward to 2022, and you can see scenarios where with all of these additional weapons, now they're not so focused on 2 players. They might have four good players in a route, something they haven't really ever had. They've been running Byron Pringle and Demarcus Robinson and Nicole Hardman out in routes alongside Hill and Kelsey for years now. And so the fact that Mahomes will now have legit weaponry across the field should help him really develop into the next stages of his career. And so there's definitely thinking about those things. But the biggest thing for me to make this deal was the inclusion of Nicole and MVS for the reasons you said, that I sort of was thinking exactly the thing that you said, that they kind of maybe will help me on opposite weeks. And maybe, it's a very slim shot that Nicole is good at this point or breaks out, but I would say maybe their upside scenarios are uncorrelated. If MVS has a great year, it's probably bad for Nicole. If Nicole has a great year, it's probably not going to be great for MVS's first season on this new roster. But in all likelihood, they're both not going to do nothing. I mean, that could happen, certainly. You could see Sky and Juju kind of be the focal point of the offense with Kelsey. Some of the other guys, maybe Justin Ross is a hit immediately. I mean, that certainly could happen. I'm still taking on risk there, but I feel like the combination of them is better than them as individual parts, and will be good for this roster in terms of, having Diggs and McLaurin and Sutton, and not particularly high on McLaurin, excited for Sutton with Russell Wilson, but unsure certainly about where he's at. And I have Gabe Davis as well. So you have these guys, and you have, Kirk and Lazard as sort of the 5 and 6. And then I'm thinking of Nicole Hardman and MVS as a combination fitting in there somewhere, maybe as the wide receiver 4 together, as a one wide receiver 4. And so it gives me more depth, and it makes this wide receiver core that independently, all of these players don't really make you super excited, but I think it's a good enough wide receiver group. It's not the type of wide receiver group I typically would build, but I definitely think it's good enough. And I'm judging that on a curve. Obviously, a lot of listeners will probably say that's a great wide receiver group. I'm a disciple of you, Shawn. I want enough wide receivers. I want 6 top 15 wide receivers, as you always say. And I'm not going to have 6 top 15 wide receivers here. But in best ball, I think this can be good enough if the running backs take a step forward. If Fant and McBride and Hayden Hurst can at least be slightly below average instead of terrible tight end production. So I'm excited. I'm really excited about this team for the next couple of years. I part of giving up all that rookie value next year was sort of, as you said, I felt like these guys are going to maintain enough value. I feel like I can pretty much play this team in 2022 and 2023 without really needing to add a whole lot. Now we'll see, but we'll see what happens with Terry McLaurin and some of these guys. But I think all of those receivers should have another year of value. I mean, like maybe the Allen Lazards lose some, but I'm expecting Gabe Davis to have a 2-year run, and McLaurin and Sutton and all of these guys to be still very viable in 2023. There's not a lot of age cliff concern here. And then it's like, okay, in 2024, I'll have a first round pick again, and I can reassess. Or if I really have to, for some reason, take a huge 90-degree turn, I can deal Mahomes, or I can deal any of these rookie running backs that are maybe hitting in an in-season window. If ETN has a great start, I can maybe deal ETN in an in-season window to try to get back into the 2023 first. So with this particular team, I thought it made sense. The big thing when I was trying to answer that question, though, of could I justify trading for Mahomes and what it would cost and all of these really premium young future assets, the big thing for me, it was sort of a unique case, but was getting Hardman, getting MVS, and then I didn't mention Fant yet in my comments, but you said so many things that I agree with as well, where Fant was a huge piece here too. I didn't feel like I could be immediately competitive without also upgrading my tight ends. And if I'm doing all of this and giving up so much flexibility, as you put it, so much future trade value, I wanted to solve all those things in that one deal, including getting Mahomes, which is already going to take so much to get. But that really was the tipping point for me. It was like, okay, I can sort of solve my wide receivers enough. I'm losing a lot of wide receiver value, but getting back MVS and Nicole makes me at least comfortable. And I can, Davis has these tight ends that are viable. I was also talking to him about Alberto. He has Alberto valued quite a bit higher than Fant. So I wound up on Fant, which was fine. But I knew I needed to get one of these guys that maybe he was less interested in. And I had to be flexible. I wasn't targeting Fant, but I was, flexible to a player that would definitely improve my tight end room. And so that combination of Nicole, MVS, and Fant, which really not central to this deal at all, was kind of the tipping point where I said, okay, I can justify now giving up this much flexibility and this much youth and firepower, because I'm solving these other problems as well. And I do feel like this roster is now ready to just play in 2022.
Yeah, and I think that this is a great example of the way that massive deals can help solve some other issues that allow it to all come to fruition, right? So if you're wanting to make a move for a big player, don't be afraid to make it a 4-for-4 or something like that, because that allows the rough edges or the slight unevenness in player value to get smoothed out. It allows both teams to accomplish their objectives. Be willing to throw those extra players in. It's a lot of fun to have these blockbusters that are blockbusters on sort of multiple levels. You had mentioned MVS and Hardman, I'd be surprised if either one of them broke out and was a big piece. But in best ball, these are useful guys because they're really very different players. I think that MVS will get over the top several times, will complete some of those long passes. Hill and Mahomes were barely off on a lot of these last season. The previous couple years, obviously, they make some of those plays. We've seen MVS make those plays with Aaron Rodgers. Defenses are going to have to be looking at other things. He's not going to get the same attention on those deep routes that Hill got. And so that in and of itself is an opportunity. Hardman probably not going to emerge as a more well-rounded wide receiver. But again, with the defensive attention on some of the other guys, I mean, he's the type of player he's demonstrated in the past, and there's no reason to think that it won't happen in the future, where once he gets the ball in his hands, he can go 60 yards in a heartbeat. You get 2 or 3 of those plays in the course of a year. It could be the thing that matters. And you talk about your wide receiver depth. A lot of listeners are going to say, yeah, that's good wide receiver depth. And it kind of comes back here too, where we talk about some of these leagues, and especially the best ball leagues. When we had Mike Leone, who's the commissioner of this league, on Overtime recently, he was talking about how to be successful in this league, you really need to be loaded 1 through 30. That doesn't mean all those guys are stars, but all 30 players have to be contributors. And you're in a situation where those guys are going to contribute. The top 3 or 4 teams in this league are going to score a ton of points, and you have to be in that mix with the guys as well.
And your team being the top team. I mean, the listeners haven't gotten this peel back the curtain yet, but Sean's team in this league is incredible. So that's what I'm competing with. He's got Kyler, Aaron Rodgers, and Carson Wentz at quarterback. He's got Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and AJ Dillon, some other running backs, Chris Carson, Sony Michel. I don't know. Your running backs aren't great because you're Shawn Siegele, but you do have Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry. And then you have Devontae Adams, Brandon Ayuk, Robbie Anderson, KJ Hamler, Tyreek Hill, Jarvis Landry, Deebo Samuel, Laviska Shenault, Tylan Wallace, and Mike Williams. And in a tight end premium, still have the best tight ends in the league by a mile with TJ Hawkinson, Gerald Everett, Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz, Hunter Henry, Tommy Tremble. This is a really, really good roster. Anthony Amico has a great roster in this league, and he was actually the winner last year. Kind of upset you. There are some really good teams. I'm right there with Leone, where you got to be deep and very deep to justify it. JJ Zachariason has a very strong team in this league as well. So very good teams at the top end, like you said. And that's certainly played into my decision, right? I was kind of, feeling like I could just languish in 4th or 5th without making a deal like this. 2, also thinking I can't make a deal like this unless it actually makes me competitive with those rosters. So I do, to break this down, Sean, I got to get you to kind of grade the trade here from both of our perspectives. Because if it's me, I think I'm giving Davis a higher grade than I'm giving myself. I think Davis did really well for himself. But what for the listeners, and we were considering similar deals, what do you think? How would you grade this trade on Davis's side and on my side?
Well, I mean, this is, again, the perfect example where it's an A for both of you and an F for the rest of us, because we lose ground compared to both of the objectives that you each individually have, right? Now, you look at this from Davis's side, the one, small sort of fly in the ointment might be that now his quarterbacks are Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, and Kenny Pickett to go with Gino Smith, even when you're sort of in that loading process. And Davis has gone ahead with the productive struggle and is building what in the end will be this just incredible juggernaut. When you have a Superflex situation and really all of your QBs have some question marks, that part of it is tricky. But yeah, I mean, you don't want to see good trades happen in your league. And we're talking about quarterback value here. So Mahomes is just the best player. Right. And even though without the rushing, maybe in any individual game, he doesn't have quite the difference-making ability that Josh Allen has, it would take a career-ending injury sometime in the interim for it not to be the case that 8 years from now, he is 34 years old and is still worth 3 first-round picks.
Right. And the other way to say that is sort of where I thought you were going when you said 8 years from now is, it would take a career-ending injury for 8 years from now for him to not have been the quarterback that scored the most points in that time. That's sort of my thought. Those other guys can score more in any given season and will, but if you're giving me an 8-year timeline, I'm taking Mahomes accumulating more points than any of them pretty easily, I think.